Richard Sterling thought power was about the loudest voice in the room. Sitting in seat 1B, he saw James Vance, a quiet man in a simple hoodie, and decided he didn't belong in first class. He called him a non-rev. He mocked his background. He even tried to frame him for a felony at 30,000 feet. But Richard made a fatal calculation. He mistook silence for weakness. He didn't know that the man he was bullying wasn't just the owner of the airline. He was the very investor flying to Los Angeles to decide the fate of Richard's company. This is the story of a 60-minute flight that cost an arrogant man his entire career. Because in the world of true power, the checkbook is held by the quietest person in the room. James Vance did not look like a man who could end a career with a single text message. Sitting in the far corner of the Delta Sky Club at JFK, he looked like a retired professor, or perhaps a grandfather on his way to visit family in Los Angeles. He wore a charcoal cashmere hoodie that had seen better days, dark denim that was comfortable rather than fashionable, and rimless glasses that slid slightly down the bridge of his nose. He was reading a physical book, a rare sight in the lounge filled with glowing screens. It was a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. James had read it 40 times. He found something new in the Stoic philosophy every time the market crashed or a board member tried to oust him. Today, however, he was reading it for patience. He was flying to Los Angeles for a meeting that would determine the fate of a mid-sized hardware technology firm called Sterling Tech. The firm was bleeding cash, and its CEO was begging for a lifeline from James's private equity firm, Vance Capital. James had decided to fly commercial, and specifically this flight because he wanted to see the product. Not the hardware, but the airline he had secretly acquired a controlling interest in 3 months ago. He was the chairman of the board, a fact known only to the C-suite and the legal department. To everyone else, he was just another passenger in seat 1A. The peace of the lounge was shattered by a voice that sounded like a bandsaw cutting through sheet metal. "You tell legal to bury the variance in the OPEX, Jonathan. I do not care if it is gray, paint it white. I am boarding in 40 minutes, and if that term sheet is not clean, you are fired. Do you hear me? Fired." James did not look up, but he felt the presence of the man approaching. The heavy footsteps, the smell of expensive cologne applied to mask the smell of nervous sweat, the sheer kinetic energy of desperation. Richard Sterling ended the call and shoved his phone into the pocket of a navy blue bespoke suit that was cut slightly too tight for his current weight. He scanned the lounge with frantic, bloodshot eyes. It was crowded. The only empty seat was the leather armchair directly across from James. Sterling didn't ask. He threw his Toomey briefcase onto the floor and collapsed into the chair, exhaling a cloud of stress. He pulled out a handkerchief and dabbed his forehead. He looked at James, really looked at him for a fraction of a second. His eyes scanned James's hoodie, the scuffed leather of his sneakers, and the old book. Sterling's brain, wired for rapid threat assessment in the corporate jungle, immediately categorized James. Not a threat, not a peer, likely a retiree traveling on miles, or perhaps a subordinate employee flying on a non-revenue ticket. A nobody. Sterling signaled a passing attendant with a snap of his fingers. "Scotch. Double. Neat. And bring me some sparkling water. The service in here has gone to hell, I swear." James turned a page. He had trained himself over 30 years of boardroom warfare to become a statue. Movement betrayed emotion. Emotion betrayed leverage. The attendant brought the drinks. Sterling took the scotch with a shaking hand. He was vibrating with adrenaline and cortisol. As he reached for his phone to check his email again, his elbow knocked the glass of sparkling water. It wasn't a catastrophic spill, but it was enough. The water arc splashed across the small table and soaked the sleeve of James's cashmere hoodie and the bottom corner of his book. The lounge went quiet in their immediate vicinity. James slowly lowered the book. He looked at the water soaking into the gray fabric. He looked at the puddle on the table. Then he raised his eyes to meet Richard Sterling's. Sterling was annoyed. Not apologetic, but annoyed that his space had been disrupted. He grabbed a cocktail napkin and threw it over the spill, doing a poor job of mopping it up. "Damn it. Table's wobbly. Look, buddy, don't worry about it. It's just water. It'll dry." James placed the book down gently on a dry patch of the table. He picked up his own napkin and began to dab his sleeve with methodical precision. He said nothing. Sterling felt the silence. It made him uncomfortable. He reached into his wallet, a thick alligator skin clip, and pulled out a $20 bill. He crumpled it slightly and tossed it onto the table near James's hand. Here. For the dry cleaning. Or buy yourself a new book. Whatever. James stopped dabbing his sleeve. He looked at the $20 bill. It was a crisp note, featuring Andrew Jackson. He looked at it as if it were an alien artifact. Then he looked back at Sterling. James spoke for the first time. His voice was a deep baritone, soft but carrying the weight of a heavy door closing. Keep it. Sterling blinked, confused. He had expected gratitude, or perhaps a mumbled complaint. He hadn't expected a dismissal. Excuse me? James pushed the bill back across the table with one finger. He didn't shove it. He slid it. You look like you need the liquidity more than I do. Sterling's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of crimson. It was a precise surgical strike. It targeted the one thing Sterling was terrified of. His company's impending insolvency. How could this old man in a hoodie know? He couldn't. It was just a lucky insult. But it stung. Sterling snatched the bill back. I don't know who you think you are, pal, but you clearly don't know who I am. I run a $100 million tech firm. I could buy this entire lounge. James went back to his book. Then you should buy better manners first. Sterling opened his mouth to retort, but his phone rang again. He looked at the screen, cursed under his breath, and answered it, turning his back on James. POV shift Sarah. Sarah, the senior flight attendant, was standing at the boarding door of Flight 294 to Los Angeles, bracing herself. She had flown this route for 12 years. JFK to LAX was the golden route, the celebrity route, the billionaire route. It was also the route where the worst behavior manifested. She checked her manifest. Seat 1, a James Vance. The name had a VIP tag next to it in the system but no specific notes. Usually VIPs had notes like Loves Lime and Diet Coke or Do Not Disturb. This one was blank. Just a high-priority clearance code she hadn't seen before. Seat 1B, Richard Sterling. Platinum medallion. The notes on him were extensive and in all caps. Demanding. Watch alcohol consumption. Complains about meal service. She sighed, smoothing her uniform. Her back was aching. She had a 3-year-old at home with a fever, and her mother was watching him. She needed this flight to be boring. She needed everyone to drink 1 glass of wine, put on noise-canceling headphones, and pass out for 5 hours. The gate agent, a young man named Kevin who was new and easily rattled, picked up the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now ready to board Flight 294 to Los Angeles with service to first class and Diamond Medallion members. Zone 1 only, please. Sarah watched the stampede. It was always a stampede. Men in suits, women in designer tracksuits, people who believed that boarding 3 minutes earlier made them superior to the herd. At the front of the pack was a man in a tight navy suit, talking loudly on his phone. He practically elbowed a young mother out of the way to get to the scanner. Behind him, moving at a glacial, calm pace, was an older black man in a hoodie. Sarah watched the dynamic. The man in the suit was radiating toxicity. The man in the hoodie was radiating gravity. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't pushing. He was just flowing like deep water. POV shift Richard Sterling. Richard was drowning. The call with Jonathan had gone badly. The auditors were asking questions about the warehouse inventory. Inventory that didn't exist. He needed this loan from Vance Capital. He needed it by Tuesday or the payroll checks would bounce. He approached the gate scanner. He needed to get on the plane, get a drink, and review the pitch deck one last time. He had to be perfect for the meeting in LA. He slapped his phone onto the scanner. Beep. A harsh red light. The gate agent, Kevin, looked at the screen. Sir, I'm sorry, please wait a moment. The system is showing a seat change error. Richard felt his blood pressure spike. What error? I am in 1B. I paid $4,000 for that seat. Fix it. Kevin typed frantically. I understand, Mr. Sterling. It seems the equipment swap reset the seating chart. Just 1 second. Richard groaned loudly, performing his annoyance for the audience behind him. Unbelievable. This airline is a joke. Do you know how much business I bring you people? He turned to the man standing behind him, the guy from the lounge. The guy who had insulted his liquidity. Can you believe this? Incompetence. Everywhere. James Vance didn't answer. He just held his phone ready, waiting. Richard scoffed. He decided to put this nobody in his place. He looked James up and down, letting his eyes linger on the worn sneakers. You know, Zone 1 is for purchase first-class tickets. Priority boarding. Group 4 is usually toward the end. James looked at Richard. The look wasn't angry. It was the look a scientist gives a lab rat that has just run into a wall. I am aware of the boarding groups. Richard smirked. Right. Non-rev, huh? Buddy pass? Did your son get you a freebie? Must be nice. Flying for free while the rest of us subsidize the industry. It was a common slur in the frequent flyer world. Non-rev meant non-revenue passenger. Airline employees, their families, friends flying on standby passes. In Richard's mind, they were parasites. They clogged up the upgrade list. They took seats that belonged to paying customers. James didn't correct him. He didn't pull out his Centurion card or mention that he had personally approved the budget for the new gate scanners last week. He just offered a small, polite smile. Something like that. Kevin, the gate agent, finally looked up, sweating. Okay, Mr. Sterling, I forced it through. 1B, you're good to go. Richard snatched his phone back. About time. He stomped onto the jet bridge. James stepped up to the scanner. He placed his phone down gently. Beep beep. It wasn't the standard confirmation tone. It was a double chime. A melodic, higher-pitched sound reserved for global services and invitation-only status holders. Kevin looked at the screen. His eyes went wide. The screen flashed a massive banner. Chairman Priority. Kevin looked up at James, his mouth slightly open. He started to stammer. Mr. Vance. I welcome aboard. Thank you for everything. James put a finger to his lips, a subtle gesture. Thank you, Kevin. Have a good shift. James walked down the jet bridge, leaving Kevin staring at his back. POV shift James Vance. The cabin smell was familiar. Recycled air, leather conditioner, and the faint scent of coffee. James stepped onto the plane. Sarah, the flight attendant, greeted him. Welcome aboard, Mr. Vance. Seat 1A. Thank you, Sarah. He moved to the first row. It was a 1-2-1 configuration, meaning the window seats were solo pods, but the middle seats had a divider. However, on this older Boeing 767 configuration, 1A and 1B were slightly offset but close enough to talk. Richard Sterling was already in 1B. He had exploded his luggage all over the area. His blazer was thrown over the divider. His laptop was open. Papers were scattered on the side table. He was claiming territory like a dog marking a tree. James stopped. Sterling's blazer was encroaching on James's armrest. James didn't shove the jacket back. He waited. He stood in the aisle looking at the jacket, then at Sterling. Sterling looked up, annoyed. What? Just sit down. There's plenty of room. James spoke softly. I believe your jacket has migrated across the property line. Richard. Sterling rolled his eyes, grabbing the jacket and stuffing it roughly into the overhead bin. God, you're petty. You really are a non-rev, aren't you? Terrified of breaking a rule. Relax, Grandpa. It's first class. Act like you've been here before. James sat down. He settled into the leather seat. He didn't recline immediately. He took out his iPad and his physical book. He placed them neatly on the console. Act like you've been here before. James thought about that. He had been here when they designed these seats. He had argued for the extra inch of width in the armrest. He had approved the thread count for the blankets. He watched Sterling out of the corner of his eye. Sterling was manic. He opened a presentation on his laptop. The screen was bright, unauthorized for viewing by a neighbor, but Sterling didn't have a privacy screen. The title slide read, Sterling Tech Series B Bridge Round Confidential. James suppressed a smile. It was fate, or perhaps just statistical probability. The man coming to beg for money was sitting next to the man holding the purse strings. James decided to do a little due diligence. Hardware tech, James said, his voice neutral. Sterling jumped. He slammed the laptop lid half shut, glaring at James. Excuse me? James gestured vaguely at the half-hidden screen. The deck. I saw the logo. Hardware is a tough sector right now. Supply chain volatility in Shenzhen is driving up component costs by 18%. Sterling stared at him. He laughed, a harsh barking sound. You read the Wall Street Journal in the break room, huh? Listen, pal. This is grown-up talk. High finance. It's not about supply chains. It's about valuation multiples and synergy. Synergy, James repeated. The word was the refuge of the incompetent. Sterling opened his laptop again, dismissive. Yes. Synergy. We are acquiring a smaller competitor to leverage their IP. It's a lock. James recalled the file on Sterling Tech he had reviewed last night. There was no acquisition target. Sterling was lying. Or he was delusional. Or he was trying to use the loan to buy a shell company to hide losses. And what is your burn rate? James asked. Sterling stopped typing. He turned his whole body toward James. The aggression was palpable now. Why are you asking me these questions? Just curious, James said, wiping his glasses with a microfiber cloth. I dabble in logistics. Numbers interest me. You dabble, Sterling mocked. Look, stick to your crossword puzzles. My burn rate is none of your business. But if you must know, we are cash flow positive as of last quarter. That was a lie. A direct factual lie. Sterling Tech had lost $12 million last quarter. James put his glasses back on. That is impressive considering the lawsuit. Sterling froze. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty and gray. What lawsuit? The class action in California regarding the battery overheating issue. It was filed under seal 3 days ago, but the docket number leaked on a legal forum. James didn't mention that his own legal team had found it during the background check. Sterling looked at James with a mixture of fear and fury. His hands were trembling. Who are you? James picked up his book, Meditations. I'm just a passenger in 1A. Sterling stared at him for a long moment. Paranoia was setting in. Was this a corporate spy? A journalist? No, he looked too ordinary. Too old. Probably just some retiree who spent too much time on Reddit conspiracy forums. Sterling scoffed, convincing himself. Yeah, right. You read too much fake news, buddy. There is no lawsuit. Sterling turned back to his laptop, but James saw him open a new window. He was frantically typing into Google. Sterling Tech California docket leak. POV shift Sarah. Sarah brought the pre-departure beverages. She balanced the tray with practiced ease. Mr. Sterling, another scotch? Keep them coming, sweetheart. And no ice this time. It waters down the good stuff. Sarah forced a smile. I'm afraid we are holding on ground service for alcohol until we reach 10,000 feet, sir. Regulations. I can get you juice or water. Sterling slammed his hand on the armrest. Oh, for God's sake. I'm paying $6,000 for this ticket and I can't get a drink? What is this, a Greyhound bus? I'm sorry, sir. Sterling pointed a finger at her. You know, I know people at this airline. I know the VP of Customer Experience. If you don't want a letter in your file, you'll find me a scotch. Sarah's stomach tightened. She hated the "do you know who I am" card. It was the weapon of small men. For Sarah, James said. His voice cut through the noise like a laser. She looked at him. He was looking at her with kind, calm eyes. I would love a sparkling water with a lime, once we are in the air. Take your time. We are in no rush. He smiled at her. It wasn't a flirtatious smile. It was a smile of solidarity. It said, I see what he is doing and I am on your side. Sterling huffed, crossing his arms. Teacher's pet. Sarah nodded to James. Thank you, Mr. Vance. She retreated to the galley. Her hands were shaking slightly. She had a bad feeling about 1B. He was a ticking time bomb. And 1A. 1A was strange. He was too calm. Most passengers would have snapped back at Sterling by now. But Vance was just absorbing it. POV shift Sterling. Richard couldn't focus. The Google search had come up empty. The lawsuit was sealed, obviously. But the fact that the old man knew about it was terrifying. He looked at James again. The guy was reading that damn book. Who the hell is he? Richard thought. He looked at James's shoes again. Old sneakers. Nice leather but old. No watch on his wrist. No wedding ring. He's nobody, Richard told himself. He's just some former low-level paralegal or something who read a rumor. He's trying to psyche me out. Richard needed to reassert dominance. He felt small. He hated feeling small. When he felt small, he attacked. It was how he had built his company. It was how he survived. He pressed the call button. Ding. Sarah reappeared. Yes, Mr. Sterling? It's hot in here, Richard snapped. Turn up the AC. The temperature is set automatically, sir, but I can check the thermostat. And it smells, Richard said loudly. He made a show of sniffing the air in James's direction. Smells like manual labor. Like old clothes. He looked directly at James. Do you guys not have shower facilities in the employee lounge? The cabin went deadly silent. The couple in 2A and 2B stopped talking. A woman in 3A lowered her magazine. It was a line crossed. It wasn't just rude. It was a slur wrapped in a complaint. Sarah gasped softly. Sir, that is inappropriate. James slowly closed his book. He placed it on the tray table. He took off his glasses and set them on top of the book. He turned his head slowly to face Richard. Manual labor, James repeated, tasting the words. Yeah, Richard sneered, emboldened by the silence. You heard me. You smell like a warehouse. James looked at Richard's hands. Soft. Manicured. Shaking. My father smelled like manual labor, James said quietly. He worked in a steel mill for 40 years so I could sit in this seat. James leaned in slightly. The air pressure in the cabin seemed to drop. And I smell like a warehouse because I spent the morning inspecting one. My warehouse. Which, unlike yours, Richard, actually contains inventory. Richard's mouth opened but no sound came out. James continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming a rumble. You are confusing the smell of labor with the smell of competence. I understand why it is unfamiliar to you. Richard turned purple. He sputtered. He looked around for support, but the other passengers were glaring at him. The young man in 2B was holding his phone up, camera lens visible over the seat back. Richard felt the walls closing in. He was losing control. He needed to get this man away from him. He couldn't spend 6 hours next to someone who saw right through him. He looked at James's bag tucked under the ottoman. He looked at his own wrist, where his Patek Philippe Nautilus gleamed, a $40,000 watch bought with company funds he hadn't approved yet. An idea formed in Richard's desperate, alcohol-soaked brain. A nasty, vindictive idea. If he couldn't bully the man into moving, he would have him removed. Richard turned away, pretending to look out the window. We'll see about competence, he muttered. James put his glasses back on and opened his book. But he wasn't reading anymore. He was counting. He knew men like Richard Sterling. He had bought and sold a dozen of them. They were dangerous when cornered. James tapped his finger on the armrest. He watched Richard's reflection in the darkened window. He saw Richard glance at the watch, then at James's empty jacket hanging on the hook. James smiled, a microscopic tightening of the lips. Go ahead, James thought. Make your move. The plane pushed back from the gate. The safety video began to play. Ladies and gentlemen, we are asking for your attention. The war for Seat 1A had begun. The Boeing 767 leveled off at 34,000 feet, suspended in the bruised purple twilight between New York and the rest of the country. Inside the cabin, the air was cool and dry, pressurized to an artificial 6,000 feet that made heavy meals sit like stones in the stomach and alcohol hit the bloodstream with accelerated violence. For Richard Sterling in Seat 1B, the altitude was an accelerant. He had consumed his second double scotch before the seatbelt sign flickered off. He was now on his third. The amber liquid swirled in the heavy glass tumbler, catching the light from his laptop screen. To anyone watching, he looked like a busy executive working late. To James Vance in Seat 1A, watching the reflection in the darkened window, Sterling looked like a man trying to outrun a collapsing building. James had not touched his sparkling water. He was still reading page 42 of Meditations. He hadn't turned the page in 20 minutes. He was listening. Sterling was typing furiously. He wasn't working on the pitch deck anymore. He was drafting an email to his chief financial officer. James could see the reflection of the bold, red text. Move the assets to the Cayman entity tonight. If Vance Capital digs deep, we are dead. James closed his eyes for a second. It was worse than he thought. This wasn't just incompetence, it was active fraud. He was sitting next to a man who was about to try and steal $40 million from James's firm. POV shift. Sarah. Sarah moved through the galley with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed this dance 1,000 times. Oven timers, tongs, linen napkins, porcelain plates. The smell of heating food filled the small space. Roast chicken, pasta, and the signature sea base. She checked the manifest again. They had loaded for sea base portions. There were 5 requests. It was a common problem, usually solved by a polite apology and a backup offer of the pasta with extra cheese. But tonight the math didn't favor her. The last sea base had been claimed by 4A, a Diamond Medallion member who flew weekly. That left 1B Richard Sterling with his second choice. Sarah felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her chest. She took a deep breath, adjusted her scarf and stepped out into the aisle with the meal cart. She started at row 4 and worked her way forward, hoping to build momentum before she hit the wall at row 1. When she finally parked the cart next to Sterling, he didn't look up from his laptop. "Mr. Sterling?" Sarah asked softly. Sterling held up a finger. "Wait." He finished typing a sentence, hit send with an aggressive stab of his finger, and then slowly turned his head. "What?" "I have your dinner, sir. Unfortunately, due to high demand, we ran out of the Chilean sea base. I have the roasted chicken with rosemary or the truffle ravioli. Both are excellent." Sterling stared at her. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. He blinked slowly, as if trying to comprehend a foreign language. "You ran out?" "Yes, sir. I apologize. We load based on projected preferences, and tonight. I selected the sea base on the app yesterday." Sterling interrupted, his voice rising. "I confirmed it. It's in my profile." "I understand, sir, but the app selection is a request, not a guarantee. We prioritize based on status and check-in time." Sterling laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Status? You want to talk about status? I am platinum. I spend $50,000 a year on this airline. And you're telling me that some nobody in row 4 is eating my fish?" He pointed a finger at James. "Did he get the fish? Did the non-rev get my meal?" James looked up from his book. He hadn't ordered dinner yet. "I haven't ordered," James said calmly. Sterling ignored him, locking eyes with Sarah. "This is unacceptable. It's just fish, right? Go back to economy. Go grab a meal from the crew rest. I don't care where you get it. Bring me the fish." "Sir, the meals in the main cabin are different, and I cannot serve crew meals to passengers. It's a health and safety violation." Sterling slammed his laptop shut. The noise cracked through the quiet cabin like a gunshot. "Health and safety? You people hide behind rules whenever you're too lazy to solve a problem." He leaned forward, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. The Scotch was talking now, loud and uninhibited. "You know what this is? This is what happens when you lower standards. You hire people based on quotas instead of competence, and suddenly the inventory doesn't match the manifest." Sarah stiffened. The insult was coded but clear. It was the same racism he had thrown at James earlier, now redirected at her. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly but her posture rigid. "I must ask you to refrain from personal insults. I am trying to help you. Don't you dare tone police me," Sterling snapped. "I want the purser. Now. I want to file a formal complaint about your attitude. You are aggressive and unhelpful." James Vance sighed. It was a soft sound, barely audible over the hum of the engines, but it signaled a shift in the atmosphere. He placed his book on the tray table. "Sarah," James said. She looked at him, her eyes wide with withheld tears. "Give him my meal," James said. Sterling whipped his head around. "I don't want your..." James held up a hand. A simple stopping motion. "I pre-ordered the sea base," James lied. "I have changed my mind. I will have the salad. Give the gentleman the fish." Sarah hesitated. She knew James hadn't pre-ordered. "Sir, you don't have to." "Please," James said gently. "It will quiet the noise. I prefer a quiet cabin." Sarah nodded slowly. She swapped the trays. She placed the sea base in front of Sterling. Sterling looked at the plate. He had won. He had bullied the system and gotten what he wanted. But the victory tasted like ash because it had been granted by the man he despised. He picked up his fork and stabbed the fish. "I don't need your charity, pal. I took what I paid for." James opened his book again. "Eat your fish, Richard. It's getting cold." POV shift the cabin. The atmosphere in first class had curdled. The luxury experience, the hot towels, the warm nuts, the endless wine, relied on a collective suspension of reality. Everyone agreed to be polite and ignore each other. Sterling had broken that contract. In seat 2B, a young man named Tyler, a 20-something software developer in a hoodie that cost more than Sterling's suit, had stopped watching his movie. He had his phone propped up against his knee, the camera lens angled perfectly through the gap in the seats. He was recording. Tyler texted his friend group chat. Dude in 1B is a total psycho. Just called the FA a diversity hire and screamed about fish. The old guy in 1A is a monk though. Hasn't flinched. Across the aisle in 2A, Mrs. Gable, a grandmother who had flown this route since the Pan Am days, shook her head. She rang her call button. When a junior flight attendant appeared, she whispered loudly, "Dear, cut him off. The man in 1B. He's drunk and he's mean. If he says one more thing to that lovely Sarah, I'm going to hit him with my knitting needles." The junior attendant nodded nervously. "We are monitoring the situation, ma'am." POV shift James Vance. The meal service cleared. The cabin lights were dimmed to a soothing blue-violet hue, simulating a sunset. Most passengers reclined their seats into lie-flat beds. The hum of the aircraft deepened as the pilots adjusted the trim for the long cruise across the Midwest. James did not recline. He remained upright, watching the flight map on the monitor. They were over Nebraska. 2 hours to go. Beside him, Sterling was restless. The victory with the fish hadn't calmed him. It had agitated him. He was vibrating with a toxic mix of alcohol, shame, and paranoia. He kept glancing at James. James knew why. Sterling was terrified that James knew about the fraud. The comment about the liquidity and the lawsuit had planted a seed of terror in Sterling's mind. Sterling needed to make a phone call. He needed to call his lawyer and his CFO and scream at them to hide the money. But he couldn't do it with James sitting 2 feet away listening. Sterling needed James gone. James watched the reflection in the window. He saw Sterling look at the overhead bin. He saw Sterling check his wrist. He saw the gears turning in Sterling's mind. It was a clumsy, desperate calculation. Sterling stood up. He swayed slightly. He opened the overhead bin and rummaged through his bag. He pulled out a small travel pouch. Then he sat back down. James closed his eyes, feigning sleep. He breathed deeply, rhythmically. He heard the rustle of fabric. He felt the slight vibration of the floor as Sterling shifted his weight. Then he felt it. A ghostly touch. James's navy blazer was hanging on the coat hook built into the side of the pod, positioned between their seats but closer to James. Sterling reached out. James heard the faint metallic clink of a watch clasp hitting a button. Sterling had dropped his Patek Philippe into the side pocket of James's blazer. James didn't move. He kept his breathing steady. Sterling waited 10 seconds. Then he stood up and walked toward the lavatory at the front of the cabin. James opened his eyes. He checked the aisle. Sarah was in the galley, her back turned. The rest of the cabin was asleep or watching movies. James moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He reached into his blazer pocket. His fingers closed around the cold metal of the heavy watch. He didn't just hold it. He stood up. He took 2 silent steps to Sterling's seat. Sterling's Toomey briefcase was open on the floor, tucked next to the ottoman. James dropped the watch into the briefcase. But he didn't stop there. He knew Sterling would check the bag. James slid the watch deep, tucking it inside the side pocket intended for a laptop charger, underneath a tangle of cables. He sat back down. He smoothed his blazer. He picked up his book. He waited. POV shift Sterling. Richard stared at himself in the lavatory mirror. His eyes were red-rimmed. He splashed cold water on his face. It's perfect, he told himself. It's the perfect play. He would accuse the old man of theft. The captain would have to get involved. They would search him. They would find the watch. The old man would be detained. At the very least, they would move him to the back of the plane for security reasons, while they sorted it out. Then Richard would have the cabin to himself. He could make the call. He could save the company. And it served the old bastard right. Acting so superior. Making him look small. Let's see how superior he looks in handcuffs. Richard dried his face. He adjusted his tie. He practiced his shocked face. He unlocked the door and stepped back into the cabin. The lights were still low. The old man was sitting there reading that damn book again. He must have woken up. Good. It's better if he's awake. Richard sat down. He waited a dramatic minute. He checked his wrist. He gasped. He checked the side table. He checked the floor. He started muttering. No. No, no, no. He stood up frantic. He began tossing pillows onto the floor. My watch. Where is it? He looked at James. James turned a page. Hey! Richard shouted. The cabin woke up. Heads popped up over the dividers. Richard pointed an accusing finger at James. You took it. James marked his page with a bookmark. He looked at Richard with mild curiosity. I beg your pardon? My Patek. It was right here on the tray. I went to the bathroom and now it's gone. You're the only one near me. James removed his glasses. Richard, I suggest you check your bag. You have had a lot to drink. Objects have a way of migrating. Don't gaslight me. Richard yelled. I know where I put it. I saw you eyeing it earlier. You and your non-rev bitterness. You think because you fly for free you deserve a tip? Sarah came running from the galley. Mr. Sterling, please lower your voice. What is the matter? He stole my watch. Richard screamed. A $40,000 Patek Philippe. I want the police. I want the pilot. Sarah looked at James. James was sitting with his hands folded in his lap. He looked like a judge watching a chaotic courtroom. Mr. Vance? Sarah asked. I haven't left my seat, Sarah. And I have no interest in Mr. Sterling's jewelry. Richard lunged for James's blazer hanging on the hook. I bet it's in here. I bet he hid it. James's hand shot out. He didn't touch Richard, but he blocked the path. Do not touch my property. Richard recoiled. See, he's hiding it. Search him. I demand you search him. POV shift the confrontation. The captain appeared. Captain Miller was a large man, an ex-Air Force pilot with silver hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. He had been alerted by the intercom. What is the problem here? Captain, this man stole my watch. Richard spat, sweat dripping down his nose. I demand he be searched. It's a felony. Grand larceny. Captain Miller looked at James. He saw the VIP code on the manifest in his mind, but he didn't know James's face. To him, James was just a high-status passenger. Sir, did you take the watch? No, Captain. Mr. Sterling is insisting on a search. To resolve this, would you mind emptying your pockets? James stood up. He was tall, taller than Richard. He looked the captain in the eye. Captain Miller, I respect your position. But I do not consent to a search of my person or my personal effects without a warrant. I know my rights. Richard laughed triumphantly. The guilty man hides behind rights. However, James continued, his voice cutting through Richard's laugh. I am well versed in this airline's conditions of carriage, specifically Article 12, Section 4 regarding security threats. James turned to Richard. An accusation of theft on an aircraft is a security threat. It implies a breach of trust and potential for violence. Therefore, before we violate the civil liberties of a passenger, protocol dictates we must rule out passenger error. James looked at Sarah. Sarah, please assist Mr. Sterling in searching his own carry-on luggage. If the watch is not found there, then, and only then, will I discuss next steps with the authorities on the ground. Richard scoffed. Check my bag? I didn't put it in my bag. I left it on the table. If you have nothing to hide, Richard, surely you want to find your watch? James asked. Unless you already know where it is? The trap was set. It was a logic trap. If Richard refused, he looked suspicious. If he agreed, he thought he was safe because he knew he had put the watch in James's pocket. Fine. Richard grabbed his Toomey bag and dumped it onto his seat. Check it. Go ahead. Humiliate yourself. Sarah stepped forward. She began to sift through the bag. Laptop, charger, iPad, toiletries kit. She felt inside the side pocket. She frowned. She pulled out a tangle of white cables, and dangling from the cables caught by the clasp, was a silver Patek Philippe Nautilus with a blue face. The cabin went silent. Absolute, vacuum-sealed silence. Sarah held up the watch. Is this it, sir? Richard's eyes bulged. He looked at the watch. He looked at James. He looked at the blazer hanging on the hook. No, he whispered. That's impossible. Put it. He stopped. He caught himself. He almost confessed. James raised an eyebrow. You put it where, Richard? Richard stammered. I must have. He put it there. He's a magician. He sleight-of-handed it. Mrs. Gable and Tue laughed. It was a loud cackling laugh. Oh, give it a rest, you drunk fool. You lost it. Apologized to the man. The tech bro and Tubby chimed in. Yeah, dude. You're embarrassing yourself. Sit down. Richard looked around. The walls were closing in. He had played his ace and it had turned into a joker. He snatched the watch from Sarah. Fine. Whatever. It fell in. My mistake. He sat down, shoving the watch onto his wrist. He glared at James with pure, unadulterated hatred. You think you're smart, don't you? James sat down. He picked up his book. I think you are tired, Richard. You should rest. You have a big meeting tomorrow. Richard leaned in, his voice a low hiss. You're dead. You hear me? I'm going to ruin you. I'm going to find out who you work for, and I'm going to buy the company just to fire you. James didn't look up. I look forward to it. POV shift Sarah. Sarah retreated to the galley. She was shaking. She poured herself a cup of water and drank it in one gulp. The captain followed her. You okay, Sarah? She nodded. That guy in 1B is a nightmare, Cap. He's looking for a fight. I'll have the police meet the plane, Miller said. Disruption of flight crew. False accusation. He's drunk. We're not letting him walk off this plane without a chat. What about 1A? Sarah asked. Mr. Vance? Miller frowned. He handled it well. Knows the rulebook better than I do. Who is he? I don't know, Sarah said. But he's not just a passenger. Did you see his eyes? He wasn't scared for a second. Miller checked his iPad. James Vance. I'll run the name through the operations center. See if we can get some background. If he's a VIP, corporate will want to know he was harassed. Miller picked up the sat phone handset to call the Systems Operations Control Center in Atlanta. Ops, this is Flight 294. I need a priority check on a passenger in 1A. James Vance. Yeah, we have a situation with 1B. I want to know who 1A is so we can apologize properly. Sarah watched him. She heard the captain's voice change. Say again. The captain went pale. He stood up straighter, even though no one could see him. Are you sure? Confirm that code. He listened. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were wide. Understood. Yes. I will handle it personally. No, do not patch him through yet. We will initiate protocol on landing. Miller hung up the phone. He looked at Sarah. Sarah. Yes, Captain. Do not let Mr. Sterling speak another word to Mr. Vance. If Sterling breathes too loud, you call me. Who is he? Sarah whispered. Miller swallowed hard. He's the owner. Not a shareholder. The owner. Vance Capital bought the airline 3 months ago. He's the chairman of the board. Sarah put her hand over her mouth. Oh my God. And Sterling called him a non-rev. Miller grimaced. Sterling tried to frame the owner of the airline for theft. Miller looked out at the cabin. This isn't a flight anymore, Sarah. It's a funeral. And Mr. Sterling is the only one who doesn't know he's in the coffin. POV shift James Vance. The cabin was dark again. Richard had passed out or pretended to. The scotch finally winning the battle against his nervous system. James typed a message on his phone. He didn't send it yet. He saved it to drafts. To David Solomon, VP of Lending. Subject. Sterling Tech Deal. Body kill the deal. Funding denied. High-risk asset. James looked at the message. It was a $40 million sentence. It would bankrupt Sterling Tech. It would put 300 people out of work. James hesitated. He was a businessman, but he wasn't cruel. Was he doing this out of spite? Was he doing this because Richard had insulted him? He looked at Richard slumped in the seat, mouth open, snoring softly. He thought about the manual labor comment. He thought about the way Richard treated Sarah. He thought about the watch in the pocket. A move designed to destroy a stranger's life just to secure a phone call. This wasn't about an insult. It was about character. Richard Sterling was a man who would burn down a village to keep himself warm. If Vance Capital gave him $40 million, he would misuse it. He would hide losses. He would abuse employees. He would eventually crash the company and blame someone else. James wasn't killing the deal to punish Richard. He was killing the deal to save his own money. It was a business decision. But James admitted to himself, as he watched the lights of Chicago drift by below, it was going to feel good. He put the phone away. He would send it when the doors opened. For now, he went back to Marcus Aurelius. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. James adjusted his glasses. He wouldn't scream. He wouldn't shout. He would just let the truth do the heavy lifting. The plane began its initial descent into Los Angeles. The pressure in the cabin changed, ears popping. Richard stirred. He woke up, groggy and hungover. He looked at James. "We landing?" Richard croaked. "Yes," James said. Richard rubbed his face. "Look, about the watch. Let's just drop it, okay? No need to make a scene with the cops. I found it. No harm, no foul." James looked forward. "The police are already called, Richard. It is out of my hands. Protocol." Richard laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "Protocol. I told you I know people. I'll make one call and the cops will walk away. I'll have you banned for wasting my time." He pulled out his phone as the cell service connected at lower altitude. "Watch this." Richard dialed a number. He put it on speaker, trying to intimidate James. "VP of Customer Experience. Watch." The phone rang. And rang. "Hello?" A groggy voice answered. "Bill. It's Richard Sterling. I'm on flight 294. I have a situation. Some passenger is harassing me. I need you to pull strings with LAX security." Bill's voice was confused. "Richard. It's 9 p.m. What are you talking about? Who is the passenger?" "Some nobody. Name is Vance. James Vance. Claims he knows protocol." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A long, heavy silence. "Bill?" Richard asked. "Richard," Bill said. His voice suddenly sharp and fully awake. "Did you say James Vance?" "Yeah." "Old guy. Hoodie. Glasses." "Richard, listen to me very carefully. Do not speak to him. Do not look at him." "Why?" Richard demanded. "Who is he?" Bill's voice trembled through the tiny speaker. "He's the chairman, Richard. He bought us. He's my boss's boss's boss. He signed my paycheck last week." Richard froze. The phone slipped in his sweaty hand. He looked at James. James was looking at him. James didn't smile. He didn't smirk. He just looked at Richard with that same terrifying calm gravity. James reached over and gently pressed the end call button on Richard's phone. "Hello, Richard," James said softly. "I believe we have some business to discuss." The wheels touched the runway with a screech of rubber. The plane shuddered. For Richard Sterling, the world didn't just stop. It ended. The seatbelt sign chimed off with a singular, cheerful ping that sounded like a judgment gavel in the sudden silence of the cabin. The aircraft had come to a stop at Gate 42B at Los Angeles International Airport. The engine spooled down into a low, dying whine, replaced by the mechanical thud of the jet bridge connecting to the fuselage. For the passengers in rows 2 through 5, this was the cue to stand up, retrieve bags, and check phones. The chaotic symphony of disembarking began. The rustle of coats, the click of overhead bins, the groan of tired travelers. But in row 1, time had frozen. Richard Sterling sat paralyzed in seat 1B. His phone, the screen dark after James had disconnected the call, sat in his lap like a dead weight. The voice of his friend Bill, "You do not speak to him," echoed in his skull, bouncing around with the remnants of the scotch and the terror of the realization. James Vance. The name finally connected the dots in Richard's alcohol-fogged brain. Vance Capital. The private equity firm that Richard's CFO had been emailing for 6 months. The firm that was supposed to underwrite the bridge loan to save Sterling Tech from bankruptcy. Richard turned his head slowly. His neck felt rusted. James was packing his bag. His movements were deliberate and calm. He slid the copy of Meditations into his leather satchel. He folded his glasses into their case. He checked under the seat for any personal items. "Mr. Vance," Richard whispered. His voice was a dry rasp. James did not answer. He stood up, pulling his simple canvas duffel bag from the overhead bin. Mr. Vance, please. Richard scrambled up. He looked frantic. The arrogance of the last 5 hours had evaporated, replaced by a desperate, sweaty obsequiousness. I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. The stress. The market volatility. You know how it is. The pressure. I've been on 3 different sleeping meds. I wasn't myself. James looked down at Richard. He adjusted the strap of his bag on his shoulder. You were exactly yourself, Richard. That is the problem. James turned to the aisle ready to leave. POV shift Sarah. Sarah stood by the cockpit door, her hand resting on the latch. She was waiting for the signal. Captain Miller had told her to hold the door until the authorities were in position. She watched the interaction in row 1. She had seen men like Richard Sterling before. She had seen them scream, she had seen them throw drinks, and she had seen them hit on her. But she had never seen one look so small. He looked like a child who had broken a window and was waiting for his father to come home. And James Vance. He looked like a mountain. Unmovable. There was a knock on the fuselage door from the outside. The signal. Sarah disarmed the slide, rotated the handle, and pushed the heavy door open. The cool, fuel-scented air of Los Angeles rushed in. Standing on the jet bridge were 3 people. First, a tall man in a sharp black suit with an airport security badge and an earpiece. This was Marcus Thorne, the LAX station manager for the airline. Behind him were 2 officers from the Los Angeles Airport Police, their thumbs hooked into their vests, faces neutral. Sarah stepped back. Good evening, gentlemen. Marcus Thorne stepped onto the plane. He didn't look at the passengers. He looked straight at Sarah. Is the cabin secure? Yes, sir. Marcus turned his gaze to row 1. Richard Sterling saw the police and instinctively straightened his tie. His survival instinct kicked in. He could still spin this. He was a wealthy white man in a suit. The police were his natural allies. He could claim James threatened him. He could claim it was a mutual dispute. Richard stepped forward, blocking the aisle. Officers. Thank God. This man. Richard pointed at James. This man has been harassing me the entire flight. He threatened my business. He made false statements about my company. I want to file a report for corporate espionage and intimidation. The police officers didn't move. They didn't even look at Richard. They were looking at Marcus Thorne. Marcus stepped forward, invading Richard's personal space. He held up a hand, palm out. Mr. Sterling. Step aside. Richard blinked. Excuse me? I am the victim here. I am a platinum member. Step aside. Marcus repeated. His voice wasn't loud, but it had the weight of iron. Richard faltered. He stepped back into the legroom of seat 1B, pressing himself against the window. Marcus Thorne turned to James Vance. The station manager's demeanor transformed instantly. The hardness vanished, replaced by a deep, respectful deference. Mr. Chairman, Marcus said. He didn't bow, that would have been theatrical, but he lowered his head in a gesture of genuine submission. Welcome to Los Angeles. I apologize for the delay in disembarking. We received the captain's report. James nodded. Thank you, Marcus. It's good to see you. How is the expansion of Terminal 4 going? On schedule, sir. We can brief you in the car. James stepped into the aisle. Excellent. He began to walk toward the door. Richard Sterling grabbed James's arm. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to stop the train that was leaving the station. Wait, Mr. Vance. The deal. My meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. with your vice president. We have a term sheet. You can't just walk away because of a seat argument. James stopped. He looked at Richard's hand on his sleeve. He didn't pull away. He just looked at the hand until Richard, burning with shame, released his grip. James turned fully to face Richard. The other passengers, Mrs. Gable, the tech bro, the people in row 3, were all standing now silent, watching the drama unfold. This isn't about a seat, Richard, James said. His voice was calm enough to be heard clearly in the quiet cabin. This is about due diligence. James reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He unlocked it. The draft message to David Solomon was still on the screen. Kill the deal. Funding denied. High-risk asset. You see, Richard, my firm does not invest in products. We invest in leadership. We invest in judgment. James tapped the screen. Sent. A faint whoosh sound signaled the message was gone. Hardware is easy, James continued. Supply chains can be fixed. Balance sheets can be corrected. But character? Character is a fixed asset. And yours, unfortunately, is a liability I cannot afford. Richard stared at the phone. He felt the vibration in his own pocket, the notification from his CFO, undoubtedly receiving the cancellation notice from Vance Capital's automated system. But, Richard stammered, the company. 300 jobs. You're destroying a company over a watch? No, James said. You destroyed it. I'm just refusing to pay for the wreckage. James turned to the police officers. Officers, this gentleman attempted to frame another passenger for a felony to manipulate a security protocol. He also verbally abused my flight crew and violated Article 12 of our Conditions of Carriage regarding discriminatory conduct. James looked at Sarah. Sarah, did you witness Mr. Sterling place the watch in my pocket? Sarah took a breath. She looked at Richard, the man who had threatened her job. She looked at James, the man who owned the company and was asking for the truth. No, sir, Sarah said. Richard let out a breath of relief. She was too scared. She wouldn't do it. I didn't see him place it, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. But I saw him remove it from his own bag after accusing you. And I witnessed him using racial slurs against you and derogatory language against me throughout the flight. I am filing a Level 1 interference report. Richard's face crumbled. Marcus Thorne nodded. Officers, please escort Mr. Sterling off the aircraft. He is hereby placed on the global exclusion list for this airline, effective immediately. Richard started to panic. No, you can't ban me. I have to get to London next week. I have meetings. The officers moved in. One of them took Richard's elbow. Sir, grab your bag. You're coming with us. Don't touch me. Richard screamed, his voice cracking. Do you know who I am? James Vance stepped onto the jet bridge. He didn't look back. We know exactly who you are, Richard, James said, his voice fading as he walked away. That is why you are leaving. POV shift Marcus Thorne. Marcus walked beside James down the long carpeted slope of the jet bridge. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and damp pavement. I apologize again, Mr. Chairman, Marcus said. We should have flagged him at the gate in New York. James shook his head. The system worked, Marcus. Eventually. But it relied too much on luck. They reached the terminal. The gate area was empty, the next flight not due for an hour. James stopped and leaned against the railing, looking out at the tarmac where the ground crew was unloading luggage. James looked tired. The composure had held for 6 hours, but the adrenaline was fading, leaving a weary sadness behind his eyes. Marcus, James said. Yes, sir. I want a review of the reporting protocol. Sarah. The flight attendant. She hesitated to report him because he threatened her job. She followed standard de-escalation, Marcus noted. Standard de-escalation assumes the aggressor is rational, James said. It assumes the customer is merely upset, not abusive. James took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I want a new policy drafted by Tuesday. If a passenger uses discriminatory language, racial, gender, anything, the crew has the autonomy to issue a warning of ban. If it continues, they have the authority to ground the passenger without captain approval. That's a significant shift, Sir, Marcus said. Legal will push back. They'll worry about lawsuits. Let them push, James said, putting his glasses back on. His eyes were hard again. Dignity is a safety issue, Marcus. If a man cannot respect the crew, he will not respect the safety instructions. If he thinks he is above the people serving him, he thinks he is above the laws of physics. That is a risk I will not carry on my balance sheet. Understood, sir. I'll draft it. What should we call it? James looked back at the plane. He saw the police escorting a handcuffed Richard Sterling onto the jet bridge. Sterling was weeping now, begging into his phone. Call it the Sterling rule, James said. Let his name be worth something at least. POV shift the bystanders. In the terminal, the other first-class passengers had disembarked. They were lingering near the window watching the drama. Mrs. Gable, the grandmother from 2A, was texting her Bridge Club group chat. Girls, you will not believe this. The quiet man in 1A was the owner of the airline. He just had the rude drunk man arrested. It was better than Netflix. Tyler, the tech bro from 2B, was uploading the video. He had blurred James's face out of a newfound respect, but he had left Richard Sterling's face in 4K clarity. The caption read, "CEO gets instant karma after bullying undercover owner. #justice, #SterlingTech, #FAFO." The video had 3,000 views in the first 10 minutes. By morning it would have 3 million. By the time the markets opened, the Sterling tech stock would be in free fall, driven by the viral evidence of the CEO's erratic behavior, and the rumor that Vance Capital had pulled the plug. POV shift Sarah. Sarah stood in the empty first-class cabin. The cleaners were coming on board. She looked at seat 1A. It was perfectly neat. The blanket was folded. The pillow was placed squarely against the wall. There was no trash. She looked at seat 1B. It was a disaster zone. Napkins on the floor. The empty scotch glass tipped over, dripping amber liquid onto the leather. The menu torn in half. She picked up the scotch glass. "You okay, Sarah?" Captain Miller asked, coming out of the cockpit. She nodded. She felt lighter. For 12 years she had swallowed the insults. She had smiled when men called her sweetheart, in a tone that meant servant. She had apologized for things that weren't her fault. Tonight she hadn't apologized. She had told the truth. "I'm good, Cap," she said. "Did you hear?" Miller asked. Marcus just radioed. "Vance is implementing a new policy. The Sterling rule. Zero tolerance for abuse. We don't have to take it anymore." Sarah looked at the empty seat 1A. "He really did it? He really did it." Sarah smiled. It was a real smile reaching her eyes. "I hope he flies with us again." Miller laughed. "I don't. My heart can't take the stress. But I'm glad he's the one signing the checks." POV shift Richard Sterling. The back of a police cruiser was hard plastic. It smelled of disinfectant and old vomit. Richard Sterling sat with his hands cuffed behind his back. His suit jacket was bunched up uncomfortably. His tie was crooked. His phone, which the police had allowed him to keep in his pocket but not use, buzzed relentlessly against his thigh. BZZZT. 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 It was his CFO. It was his lawyer. It was his wife. The notifications were piling up on the lock screen he couldn't see. Email. Vance Capital notice of withdrawal. Text CFO Richard, what is happening? The wire didn't hit. The bank is calling. Text. Wife, why is there a video of you on Twitter screaming at a flight attendant? Alert. Sterling Tech down 12% in after-hours trading. Richard stared out the window at the LAX terminals passing by. He saw the massive billboards for luxury brands, watches, cars, suits, the trappings of the world he thought he owned. He realized with a cold sinking horror that he didn't own any of it. He had rented it. He had rented the status. And he had failed to pay the rent, which was paid not in money but in conduct. He remembered James Vance's words. "You are a high-risk asset." Richard closed his eyes. He wasn't crying for the company. He wasn't crying for his employees. He was crying because he knew deep down that James was right. He had always been a fraud. He had just finally been audited. POV shift James Vance. The black Lincoln Navigator moved smoothly through the Los Angeles traffic. The interior was quiet, insulated from the noise of the highway. James sat in the back. He had declined the champagne Marcus had offered. He had asked for water. He took a sip from the bottle. He felt the fatigue settling into his bones. He was 55 and days like this cost him more than they used to. He pulled out his phone. He had one more call to make. Not to a lawyer. Not to a banker. He dialed his home number. It rang twice. "Hello?" The voice was warm, sleepy. His wife, Elena. "Hey," James said softly. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No, I was reading." "You landed?" "Just left the airport." "How was the flight?" Elena asked. James looked out the window. He saw the city lights sprawling out to the horizon. He thought about the man in handcuffs. He thought about Sarah standing tall in the galley. He thought about the $20 bill Richard had thrown on the table. "It was long," James said. "Did you get any work done?" James smiled. "I did a little cleaning." "Cleaning? You? You haven't done dishes in 20 years. "Corporate cleaning," James said. "I took out the trash." Elena laughed. She knew him too well. "Hey, Mr. Fix-It. Are you coming home soon? I have meetings tomorrow. I have to find a new hardware partner." The Sterling deal fell through. "Oh, that's a shame. Was the technology bad?" "The technology was fine," James said. "The interface was the problem. User error." He leaned back in the seat, closing his eyes. "I'll be home Friday, Elena." "Okay. Love you." "Love you too." James hung up. He put the phone away. He didn't check the stock market. He didn't check the news. He reached into his bag and pulled out the book. He opened it to the page he had marked, the page Richard had interrupted 6 hours ago. He read the passage again, letting the ancient words wash over the modern chaos. "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." James Vance adjusted his glasses, turned the page, and rode on into the quiet night.